Hey, closet busters and bold move makers. It is time once again for Life Uncloseted. So I want you to gather around because it is time once again to kick down those closet doors of your life. We're here to escape our BS, explore our fears, and elevate our self-expression. I'm your host, Rick Clemens. I'm the bold move expert and that coming out guy who's going to take you to the party, the pulpit, the wake, and back to the party of living your life uncloseted. So come on along with me and grab hold of yourself and get ready to step out, step up, and step into facing your fears, making your bold moves, and living life without apologies. Now let's get to the show. Hey, Life Uncloseted family. It is your host, Rick Clemens, the guy that challenges you to live your life uncloseted. And I know some of you are constantly finding yourself making excuses about why you can't do the things that you want to do and why you keep holding yourself back. And that's what I call girls, guys, bitches, whomever. It is living in a closet. But you know what? If you dump those excuses and you really started stepping up and facing your fears, you would begin to realize, hey, this living an unapologetic life is pretty easy. So if you're struggling with that, I would like to invite you to go hop over to the website, check out the Unapologetic Life Assessment, and go over there and take it. And all you have to do is go to Unapologetic Life Assessment, or actually go to rickclemens.com, the homepage. You'll find where you can take that assessment. And let's figure out what's going on with you. It's a series of free videos and stuff to help you get to that space of living your life without apologies. Another way to quickly get there is to go to nofearsnoexcuses.com. So see, I'm giving you all these ways to get over there, but let's move on with the show, because here's something that I wish more and more people would stop making such a big deal about, because people don't need to live in the closet just because they're HIV positive. And in my own community, I get really frustrated with people who shame the HIV positive community. Oh, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. In this day and age, there's so many ways to have beautiful, loving, intimate, caring, great sex relationships with someone who is HIV positive, and it's time for that shaming to stop. And how do you do that? Well, you have fun with a fun musical comedy called Merce. And it's all about this character who is HIV positive. There's musical comedy, all this good stuff. And I just happened to find the main character through a friend of mine. And he's here joining us today on the podcast. His name is Charles Sanchez. And Charles, I want to welcome you to Life Uncloseted, man. And thanks for stepping up to share your beautiful self, the positive musical comedy, all that good stuff. So now it's time for Rick to shut up and say, okay, it's your show now, Charles. You just go with it,
man. Well, great. I'm happy to take over.
Yes, I'm sure you are, because I've seen a couple of these episodes. I'm like, this guy could just carry the whole show and I could just shut the fuck up. So,
well, I have to correct you. It's called Merce.
Merce. Okay. I knew I was going to screw it up because Charles and I were talking about this before. We got on there. I'm like, it's not Merci, right? And he's like, no, dumbass, that would be with an I. And I'm like, okay. So then Merc, and because it's early here in California, I'm like maybe a cup and a half into coffee here. So thank you for correcting it. So now I will shut the fuck up and you can just take over the show.
Well, where shall I start?
Why did you bring that? What was this whole concept? I mean, other than, hey, let's talk about this crap, but what was the concept of like, we need to do this and we need to make it fun and positive? What was the start of this whole thing?
Well, there are a bunch of impetuses. I'm a person who is living with HIV, and my producing partner, Tyne Furman, and I both just sort of wanted to start creating some content, just started to create our own acting work, basically.
Yep.
And also, I noticed that like on television and movies and, theater, whenever there was an HIV storyline, it was always sad. It was either a history lesson about the 80s and 90s, which are, vital stories. We need to always not forget our history. Or even if it was like a very special episode of Law and Order, they would have a violin playing in the background when you find this person has HIV.
And nothing wrong with violins, folks. We don't want to,
but I prefer fiddle.
Okay, fine. Well, yeah,
it's just
I prefer fiddling around. So anyway.
Oh, hey, wow. But I just that's not my experience, and right. I don't know anyone in my circle of people that are living with HIV that walk around like sad clowns. I mean, we all have amazing senses of humor. We all have a great joie de vivre, And I wanted to create something that showed that to people, that showed a modern story of someone living with HIV who wasn't sad, sick, or dying.
Mm.
And so when we were developing the project and it became a comedy, and then we're like, well, what's more opposite of what you think of when you think of
Yeah,
HIV?
yeah, yeah.
A body musical. So that's what we created. We created this body, crazy, silly, fun, candy colored musical comedy. And we have this character, Merce, who has he lives in New York, but his mother is always on Skype with him. And his mother lives in Texas. And
Okay.
my producing partner plays Mama in drag. And then he's got all these crazy characters around him, and he lives his life. Certain aspects of his life he sees through a musical comedy lens. And he's got these three fairies that are kind of like his gay pips
Mm-hmm,
who
mm-hmm.
back him up. And basically, we just show aspects of his life that show a character that is just like everybody else. He's just looking for love. He's just trying to have a great life, just like you, just like me.
Well, and I think that's the important piece of this whole conversation. And granted, yes, the history and where we come from and the lack of government support when things started to happen. And I mean, not discounting any of that at this point.
No,
But I also feel like not everything has to be a tragedy. Everything
right.
there can be some fun, there can be some humor. And I'm not just talking about the HIV crisis. I'm talking about things in general,
Absolutely.
and yes, we live in a crazy world right now where it seems like no matter what we're looking at, whether it be the politics or, disease and all this sort of stuff, as we're recording this, the new coronavirus thing is just like rampant everywhere. But it's also these beautiful wake up calls to have fun and appreciate life and be in life in your best possible way.
Mhm.
And too often, I think we forget this. And then suddenly people are right back in closets. And I have so many good friends who are HIV positive, and I have had numerous conversations with them about the loneliness they feel at times, the stigma that they experience, and the low self esteem that brings on, which is hard enough for us as gay men. Not that we're the only ones who suffer with this, but it just layers on another piece of, okay, I'm not worthy. And I
Mhm.
love that you're bringing this forward in a space to like, okay, let's show the brighter side of when you can look at things through a different lens.
Thank
So,
you.
so I'm curious. Obviously, at some point in time, you have, I'm going to assume, experienced some negativity because of your own status.
Sure.
What's been the hardest piece of that? I mean, is it that, people just like suddenly said, hey, I'm not going to, want to have anything to do with you? Or, is it this piece of, okay, I got to own myself and I got to step forward and I got to just be who I am? I mean, there's got to be challenges that you experience throughout this whole coming to terms with your own self.
There have been some challenges, and there continue to be, and they always surprise me. Like when someone has a prejudice against someone living with HIV. It happened to me in a dating app recently where I met this guy and we were talking for a while, and it seemed like, oh, we're gonna meet. This is all happening, and then he found out that I had HIV, and he was my age. This is what shocked me. My age, in his early 50s,
Hmm.
educated man living in New York City, and it freaked him out. He completely panicked. He got all
Mm.
apologetic and jittery and weird, and basically like hung up the phone, and that was it, and it was over.
Wow.
And it just shocked me. I couldn't believe that that happened in this day and age,
Yep.
and yet it still does, and people are still afraid. And I think that's currently the things like that happen. I was really sort of had an odd blessing when I was diagnosed. I got very sick. I almost died. I was one of those people who was diagnosed with AIDS,
Hmm.
and I was in a drug-induced coma. And
Mm.
so when I woke up 3 weeks after I got sick, my family was all around me. They found out that I had AIDS before I did. And
Mm.
so I never had to have that big moment of telling my family. So I
Right.
think that made it easier for me in other avenues of my life, like that big coming out of the closet.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do to them
Hmm.
as far as my HIV was concerned. And so it made it easier for me then to just be honest with other relationships in my life.
Hmm. But don't you think there's still this, I'm going to call it confusion, with people not understanding HIV and AIDS. It's like, oh, if you're HIV, you've got, you boom, that's where you are. You have AIDS. And I think people continue to like the uneducated. I'm just going to say it, the uneducated put this stigma on. And it's like, wait. You've got to go do the homework. In fact, when I'm working with my clients, so a lot of my clients are men coming out of the closet. And as you can imagine, some are like, well, I'm just really concerned about, catching something and dying from AIDS. I'm like, okay, well, first of all, before we go any further, here's a link. Here's everything you need to go read about HIV and AIDS. And do not come back to a session with me until you have gone through this, because I'm acting like I'm really a bitch about this, which I'm not quite that big of a bitch, but kind of, because I want them to get educated. I want them to understand, because I think as gay men, especially, and anybody who I get in conversations about this with, but especially as gay men, you owe it to yourself to understand. You need to understand all aspects of STDs, AIDS, HIV, all that sort of stuff. And do you still see that being a problem? Is that a lot of people don't know this stuff?
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation, and
Yes.
I think I always say part of the problem is we have this collective scar from the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. I think that fear and those images of people that were dying from AIDS back then are still so much part of our consciousness. The minute you hear AIDS or HIV, that's the first thing you think of.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't hear about HIV in the news very much anymore.
Right.
It's not sexy. So we don't get the opposite information that we need in major media to get the information out there.
Right.
And so I love that you're encouraging, especially your gay clients, to go and get educated, because I think we're supposed to be the leaders.
Yes.
We always have been. And so it's up to us to not only get educated, but to educate others.
It's interesting. There's one of the ads out there for PrEP, and it kind of shows all these different people saying, I can't remember the exact phrase they say, but I'm
very happy, those people on PrEP commercials.
Yeah.
Very happy.
And I was sitting, I can't even remember where we were, but we were somewhere with a group of people, and that ad came on, and it was predominantly a bunch of, gay people, but there are a few of my heterosexual friends in the room. And one of the guys said, I don't get this commercial. I'm like, what is it you don't get about it? He goes, well, there's like women talking about being on that drug. I'm like, yes. In fact, I think any sexually active person should probably be considering being on PrEP. He goes, but why? They're not gay. I'm like, you don't get this.
No.
You do not get this at all. It isn't just a gay thing.
Right.
And, I hate to say it. So I put my mama's gonna teach you some lessons, boy, hat on. And I said, here's the thing. You know me, you know my story. I said, and you know that when I was married, I was not being faithful. That's all it would have taken for me to, quote unquote, have passed something on to my wife, even though a majority of the time I played safe. And suddenly it was like the light bulb went off. He's like, oh. And I said, and quite honestly, man, it would be a weird twist of things for you to contract it, but you don't know if you, and he's a big man ho, so this is why I was able to go there with him. I'm like, you don't know who your sexual partner may have been with, and she may not know. And I said, there's just all these different things. And then what if one night you just decided you were going to explore something? You were going to go somewhere that you didn't. And I know, because he's kind of, he hasn't admitted, but I know he's kind of on the fence. So I'm like, okay, one of these nights you're going to go down that dark alley and it's going to feel right. And then you might do something really stupid, because he tends to do really stupid stuff when he drinks. So this is why I knew I could go all these places with him. And I think that's part of what happens is people are not getting the right education at this point. And then we can't have fun and make this more lighthearted like you're doing with the series. And then suddenly we have the whole, oh, this is so bad stuff still continuing to permeate our society.
Absolutely. One of the things we try to do, especially with season 2 that has just come out of Merce, is we added a lot more issues to this season. We talk about being undetectable. We talk about PrEP. We talk about slut shaming and gay marriage and other issues. And I think the biggest lesson of Merce is like, be who you are and be proud of who you are, and don't be ashamed. Like, and you say unapologetic. I think that's very important, and that's a lesson that we all need to learn in every aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the show a little bit. Like, what has been some of the biggest surprises for you as you've gotten this show out there in the world?
There have been a lot of like interesting people that have not enjoyed the show because they thought it was going to be something else.
Hmm.
They thought because it was an HIV show that it was going to be an educational show. And it has some educational elements, but really it's a comedy. It's a raucous, bawdy, nasty, dirty little show.
Right.
And that's what it really is. So we're not gonna knock over safe sex over your head or anything like that. That is not
Right.
what our show's about.
Right.
I think there's been a little bit of odd disappointment when it's not a government sanctioned
Right.
sex talk.
Hmm.
But otherwise, people are so surprised by how fun it is and how much joy it brings. And so that's been really a fun thing to watch people experience and for that feedback to come.
But don't you think, Charles, that that just proves what we were just talking about, that there's almost this like internalized view of, well, this is how we're supposed to look at this. We're only supposed to look at it through an educational lens. We're only supposed to look at it through the painful lens. We're only supposed to look at it from, this is something that is a fight and an advocacy. And again, I'm not diminishing any of that, but we haven't made room yet for even going back to the Queer as Folk days. I don't know that even they completely spun it in quite the most positive light at times. And I think it's time to really do more of that.
I think so too. I had a conversation with a friend of mine about Will and Grace. That, Will and Jack, being gay men of a certain age,
Yep.
never have a conversation about HIV, never go to an HIV event, never talk about friends they lost, never. And that's a huge, on this major comedy that gets so much worldwide attention.
Right.
What a lost opportunity.
Huge lost opportunity. In fact, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was watching, my husband and I watch stuff well after it's already aired. So we have our weekly shows. It's like, okay, we don't watch it live because we don't have cable, but we then go to Hulu or wherever and watch everything. We were watching an episode of Will and Grace last night about, him having, surrogating and all this stuff and having a baby and everything. And I thought, well, this is good. And they've kind of addressed his potential marriage and all this sort of stuff. But I'm like, there's so much more to gay life that this show hasn't addressed. And ironically, knowing that you and I were going to talk about this, that crossed my mind last night, and then also that there's not a lot of addressing, what does gay divorce look like?
Yeah.
There's lots of things, which I know we're in the infancy of some of this stuff, like marriage stuff, but we're actually not. I mean, gay people are now getting divorced too. Yeah. And there's a whole other thing, that those are things that just need to be talked about. And I think we're missing opportunities
in our gay world.
Yeah.
For people to be talking about.
So I'm going to hold you responsible for, filming all those things. You're now going to have to become the voice to make all this become, talked about. Yeah. So what have you enjoyed most about like allowing yourself to shine the light on this subject? What have you personally enjoyed the most?
I enjoy the fact that I am like the only person really doing this, in creating this show, me and my producing partner. That we're the only ones making a show that's like this, that's funny and smart and shows somebody living with HIV that isn't a tragic figure. And I think that that's a really important thing, and I'm really proud of that, and that it is uproariously funny. I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, there's something that came up in the pre-work that I was doing that I read that I believe your producer Tyne said about, or maybe actually it was you, I think, that talks about it not being a picnic to live with HIV.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, but no one walks around with this sad cloud over their head, and I see more and more of that. In fact, I had a young friend recently tell me that he was HIV positive, a young guy that I coached for a while. And he goes, but, life moves on. And I thought, wow, 9 years ago, if I'd had a client like you, it would have felt like a death sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would have felt like my life is over. And for some people, they would have taken that step. They would have committed suicide, And I think the shows like you're doing are some of the most important work out there right now.
Oh, thank you.
Well, just because I think we as a society, we need to like lighten up a bit.
We need that balance. There's so much, like you were saying,
Yeah.
there's so much heavy stuff happening.
Right.
We need some cotton candy every now and again. We need
Right.
some sugar.
Yeah.
And
A friend of mine that's local here. So my husband and I run like a meetup for the LGBTQ community in our small little town here. And I remember talking to him, and he was married, came out of the closet, divorced. He doesn't have kids. And he goes, yeah, it was great coming out. All that was good. And he goes, and then, 3 months later, I found out I was positive. And so I didn't say anything. I'm like, I've done enough of these kind of interviews, and being a coach, I kind of like, okay, so let's see what comes next. Right. And he said, so I kind of got that done. I can kind of just screw around all I want. And he goes, I'm kidding. But he goes, it's kind of interesting. Most people would see that as like the most horrible thing. And he's like, this is part of my life. And so this is the cards I've been handed. So I'm not going to like be upset about it. He goes, it's frustrating at times. He goes, especially living in a very small community where the the buffet of prospects is about the size of 2 hot dishes on a regular buffet line. But it is interesting to see how people can take stuff and then go to the opposite extreme, where another one of my current clients, has recently discovered he's positive, and I can't get him to focus because this is all he can think about. And I'm like, yes, but this isn't the end of your road. And he's fortunate because he's in the opposite sort of space where he's in a very big metropolitan area, which I know that in and of itself can be a whole different ballgame when you're positive. It's like, oh, there's so many people available. And they're like, well, why would I date you when I have all these others that aren't this? So it's interesting to see the dynamics that show up around this whole, oh, you're positive, versus, yeah, I'm positive and I'm cool. Why can't you be cool with it? So.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me that really helped that in a big way, in an unexpected way, was finding out about U equals U. That when I realized that I've been living with HIV since 2003, and I started testing undetectable soon after I got off on medication. So right after I was diagnosed,
right.
And to find that out, that in all that time, no one has gotten HIV from me, was hugely powerful, and it helped me feel less sick. And I didn't even know I had that feeling. But I think it's one of the most powerful tools we have in HIV, that empowers people living with HIV to live a bigger, bolder life, a more unapologetic life.
Absolutely.
And one that has less, more make you feel like you're more like everybody else,
So for our listeners who don't know what U equals U, can you kind of elaborate on that for them?
Sure. What it stands for is undetectable equals untransmittable, meaning that if you have an HIV viral load that is undetectable in lab tests, that you cannot transmit the virus sexually. There's zero risk.
Yep.
And that is scientifically proven. The CDC has come out on board with that statement. It's a worldwide campaign called U equals U.
Yep.
You can go to Prevention Access Campaign or look up U equals U, and you can find it and find out more information. But it is one of the biggest life-changing things that has happened for me in the past, I guess, 4 or 5 years, was to find out that news and to be peripherally part of that campaign, and really want to share the message. I know you guys can't see me, but I'm actually wearing a U equals U t-shirt right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love that you brought that up because it is important. And we'll have a link to that information as well on the show pages and stuff. But it couples very nicely with a friend of mine. And this is one of those moments where people think, oh, you live in New York, you must know so-and-so. No, I don't do that bullshit, because it's kind of like, oh, you're gay. Well, do you know so-and-so? No, just because we're all in the little gay world doesn't mean there's like this database
I
that we
might have
all
slept
connect
with
on.
him, though. I might have slept
Exactly.
with
Well,
him.
this is true, but and I'll be, if you say, oh, I know him, then I won't actually be all that surprised. But Damon Wright, who is one of the biggest PrEP advocates in the country, he's been on my show a couple of times. And I loved when he said the availability of PrEP actually enabled me the most freedom to enjoy my sex life as a gay man than I ever have since it came out. I thought, that's really true, because you now are you're fully in control. Okay. And he and I talk about, okay, but we know it doesn't like keep you from getting the STDs, but it's another layer of freedom that comes with it. And I feel like You Equals You is the same sort of thing. It's like
It's a
people
partner.
get fucking educated and understand this stuff.
Well, and other STDs are treatable. I mean, what's a little
Yes.
gonorrhea between friends?
Right. Exactly.
But
Well, it's like a Thanksgiving dinner,
right. Just not a big
not really, but yes. Yeah.
But it's not HIV. It's not.
Right.
It doesn't have the possible life-threatening issues that HIV does.
Absolutely. And I think so many people, and I've seen this, and again, this goes to the slut shaming and everything else, but I've seen this happen in our community. And when it happens, this is when I cannot keep my mouth shut. I mean, I'm pretty good about, okay, let's kind of try to see perspectives, but I always have to say something when I hear this. Yes, but how do you really know they're undetectable? I'm like, then you're never going to trust anybody.
Right. We take our chances every day.
Yeah.
We take our chances walking out the door.
Exactly. And I've always come from that perspective of like, well, how do you know that person who says they have no STDs really doesn't have any STDs?
Right.
How do you know that they say they always play safe with a condom, and then they've got your legs up over your shoulders, and then suddenly they whip that condom off and, bada bing, bada boom, they're in their raw. I mean, it's these things that sometimes in our lovely gay community, and again, any of you listening, I love all of you, but I think this is where our own personal judgments, just like sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot because we throw these judgments out, but then we want to go turn on everybody else who's throwing those same judgments at us, but we are just being just as judgmental. It's like, you got to trust. And my coaching hat goes on really quickly, like, okay, but wow, then you must have a hard time trusting people in general. And that usually shuts them the fuck up, or it gets them really pissed off. I'm like, and girl, you're just proving my point. You're just coming at me with your heels on. But, and yes, sometimes I do talk like that in a coaching session, and not too often. But I do see that, and I think it's something that we can all learn from. Is how do we throw our judgments at one another without saying, can we talk about this? Help me understand. Help me understand, because I think there's a lot of people that, even if they've heard You Equals You, and that's why I had you explain it. Oh, okay, well, okay, so you say, but then they don't take the time to go understand it.
Right. Well, and it's like anything else. They need to hear it several times before it gets in there and they understand it.
Well, exactly. It's like, yes, I have a big schlong. Yes, I have a big schlong. Yes. Do you hear me? I have a big schlong. It's like, you got to hear this over. Okay, cool. I know you kind of got really quiet. And no, guys, I do not. Well, I'm not going to say not, and I'm not going to say I do. So I don't know why I even brought that up, but anyway,
I don't know.
No, it's making an emphasis that it is. I'm a marketing guy. So truly, I get this. It's like, you have to send the message several times before people finally go, oh, okay. So undetectable really does mean untransmittable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And trust does mean trust. Now, granted, if you don't trust people, then you're going to have a little hard time with this piece. But
well, I also say too, like someone who is living with HIV and in treatment, and someone who's taking PrEP, they're the safest people to have sex, to have unprotected sex with, because they're seeing the doctor several times.
Exactly.
A year.
Right.
And they're being tested not just for HIV, but they're being tested for other things as well.
Yep. Every 3 months.
As opposed to someone who just goes, who maybe goes to see their doctor once a year.
Right. I mean, I am on PrEP, and I'm proud to say I'm on PrEP, because and I'm not going to go to the holy ground, but kind of. because that says I care enough about myself and I care enough about my husband and my partner to say, hey, if occasionally we're going to go do something on the side, I don't want this to be an issue.
Right.
And it's part of just me doing something that feels good for me.
I think it's good for the community, and just like, and for you to say it out loud that you're on PrEP. It's good for people to know that, and I think it's part of one of the things that I like about PrEP is that it's. I think for so long the transmission of HIV and keeping that transmission from happening has been on the responsibility of the person who's living with HIV.
Right.
And PrEP gives that responsibility a little bit to other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what I'm about to say may piss some people off, but it's my show, so I get to say these things. If you're not going to own responsibility for your own sexual activities, then you shouldn't be having sex.
Heavy. Yeah.
Because like it or not, you're making the decision to do the things you do in the sexual realm. And to hold somebody else 100% responsible for your sexual health is complete bullshit. Because you're entering into it just as much as they are. Now, that doesn't mean you got to like have the checklist out like, okay, here we go. Can you produce, okay. And there are some people, I have a friend that's like, oh, I know they have to show me their last test. And I'm like, girl.
And they do? Does he get any?
That's what he says. I'm just kind of like, really? But then there's this other side of him. And he's like, yeah, I'm really sexually frustrated. I'm like, no wonder. Right. I mean, hello, if you're pulling out literally like, oh, you have to show me when your last HIV test was. I'm like, girl.
Yeah, if there's a questionnaire involved, that's too much work.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's an online questionnaire that they fill out before. Now there's an app that might be something really valuable in our community. Like you go from Grindr or Scruff or wherever into an online app, fill it out. Okay, cool. You made the checklist, but then that would be just too much work, and sex doesn't even become fun anymore. So
right.
Anyway, well, I'm so glad we got connected. I've loved this conversation. I love what you're doing, man, and thank you for taking the heaviness of something that, yes, we need to pay attention to and we need to understand. But I think that's the key, is we really need to understand at a deeper level as humans, some of these sticky, heavy human things, and realize there's always a lighter side to everything. And right, just make it that way.
Everything's about attitude, it's not what happens to you, it's how you handle it. And when I was diagnosed, that's what a friend of mine said to me. I was crying in the hospital, and he goes, "You've got a really bad attitude." Mm-hmm. Said, just take your medications and do what the doctors say, and you're going to have a great life. And he was absolutely right.
Right. Well, and it shows. You show it even through just this, audio sort of presence that we have through the art of podcasting. I can tell you that a lot of listeners, actually all of you, none of you say you don't get how good he is. No, I'm kidding. But there's just this essence, Charles, that even if I didn't have the camera on, and there's a lot of time I haven't actually been looking at the camera, not because he's not cute, he's a cutie, but where the essence of who you are is shining through. And I wish that more people would let the essence of who they are, regardless of their circumstances, come shine through. And I think our community, for sure, would be a much better place, but the world would be a better place. Love what you're doing. We will have links to the show, to Charles, all that good stuff. And bitches, go watch the show. Okay, please go watch it. It's
mercetheseries.com.
Yes, mercetheseries.com. Not Mercy, not Merc, not any of that. It's Merce. The series.
Merce.
The series. Let's get it right, Rick. It's the end of the show, Rick. It's Merce, not Merc, not Mercy, none of that stuff. So, but that's why I put the links on the freaking webpage, because then I'm like, okay, bitches, if you can't find it because it's written there in front of your eyes, not my problem. But anyway, thank you so much, Charles. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Look forward to seeing you continue to do this really great work. So thanks, buddy, for being here. Hey, Life Uncloseted family. Another episode of Life Uncloseted has come to an end, and it is time for all of us to sashay away and go face our fears, make those bold moves, and stand up to living our life without apology. But before you do, I've got a favor to ask of you. Would you hop over to iTunes or Spotify or Podbean or wherever it is that you're listening to this and just give us a little bit of love if you like what we're doing here at Life Uncloseted. Here's what it does. It helps other people find the show. It helps other people get to know what we're all about. And you just might help change a life. In fact, if you really want to change a life, we'd love it if you just ask a friend to take a listen and see what they think. So that's it. Love you all deeply. I'm Rick Clemens, the host of Life Uncloseted, and never stop stepping out, stepping up, and stepping into living your life uncloseted.